All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sefer Zainalek, and on behalf of the Iranian Student Association at UTSA, I would like to welcome you all to our tonight's event. This event is dedicated to prominent Persian figures throughout history who have contributed significantly to our world civilization. From Ferdowsi to the late Maryam Mirza Khan. Our tonight's guest is a Persian prominent figure himself. It's not me, by the way, I'm sure you already figured it out. Many of you know him already, but for those of you who don't, Dr. Mojan Shidi has been the advisor of record of the Iranian Student Association at UTSA for the past several years. He has also been working with the Department of Electrical Engineering and has contributed to more than 707 publications. And that number continues to grow exponentially. His presentation tonight is a summary of his upcoming book, and I'm quite sure that I'm not the person you want to hear talking all the night tonight. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming Dr. Mojan. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming, taking time from your very busy schedule. This lecture will be videoed in 2 languages, in first English tonight and Farsi in a few weeks from now, and both will be put on YouTube for everyone to watch. And this is actually the tip of the iceberg in terms of the book project. I have been dreaming to write a book on the Persian science and poetry for almost 59 years. When I was growing up in the city of Shiraz in southern Iran, in the hot days of summer, I began realizing such a project at that age. But it was only when I came to America in 1963 and learned more about our scientists and our poets, I became more and more confirmed in my decision to do such a project. In the final book, I would imagine I would have to cover something like 60 to 70 chapters, each of them dedicated to one single individual. And the reason I brought poetry into the picture of scientists was that I was amazed by Jalaluddin Rumi, Maulana Rumi, of how many scientific predictions he had made in his poetry. I have a book dedicated to just that subject. So the goal is, I will go over the goal of the project. Let me go this side, maybe I will not be covering anybody's view. Then talk about the history of medicine and science, especially astronomy and mathematics in Persia. In that regard, I would cover Bu Ali Sina or Avicenna, Razi, Biruni, Khwarazmi, and Khayyam. Those are 5 of the most celebrated Persian scientists, and ironically, all of them have a crater in their name on the planet Moon. I will show you the pictures. Then I'll talk about 2 poets, Rumi and Saadi. I'm sorry I was not ready quite to talk about Ferdowsi, the epic poet of Iran who saved the language of Farsi. I hope to do that in my next installation of this, hopefully to be a series of lectures. And then I'll talk about some recent scientists, engineers, and poets, and talk about some key impacts of these 7 individuals, and then tribute to Professor Maryam Mirza Khani, a genius mathematician whom the whole world lost at a very young age of 40. What a shame to hear that. And then I'll show a 10-minute video of Maryam which took place on campus of Stanford University, where people from as far away as Europe and at East Coast from Harvard, MIT, came to Stanford in her memory. Then I will also talk to one of my mentors, Professor Lotfi Asgharzadeh, or Lotfi Zadeh for short, who also passed away not at age 40, thank God, at age 96. And that happened on September 6th of this year. Then I'll have a final remarks to do that. We want to create a factual account of what Persian and Iranian citizens, starting from Azeris, Baluchis, Elamites, Gilanis, Kurds, Medes, Persian, Turks, and so forth, scientists and poets have done and have achieved for the past 25 to 30 centuries, and how their work has impacted the civilization that we have today in early part of the 21st century. The project undoubtedly has tied into the history of Persia and all the years that the country went through ups and downs and several invasions. But what is important that Iran of today, like a few countries around the world, we do not celebrate Independence Day. We have always kept our independence and were not submitted to any foreign power. These are the list of tonight's lecture individuals, as I already told you. Avicenna, and incidentally, my presentation tonight is not necessarily in chronological order. I will do that in the book itself, but once I write a substantial number of chapters, I will put them in the right order of the time, and I will specifically look for the benefits of the previous scientists for the work of the future ones. For example, you will see that Khayyam benefited a lot from Abu Ali Sina, from Avicenna. He read his books and works. Or Sadi, or Hafez rather, benefited immensely from Sadi and Attar and others. So there are some kind of chain between the scientists and poets, which I like to discover and bring it to your attention. So in every chapter, you see a table like this, shows where the individual was born. And for example, Avicenna was born in a village called Afshana, outside of Bukhara. At that time, Bukhara was part of the Persian Empire. And what I do, I immediately put a map of the Persia at the time of the birth and life of that individual. So it will show you, in fact, where it was. And Bukhara is right here, very, very close to inside here. In those days, there was a greater Khorasan, which included the current province of Khorasan, the major part of Afghanistan, and then almost the entire of Tajikistan, and a major part of Uzbekistan, all the way to Aral Sea in the north. These were all part of Khorasan. And also shown here is my hometown, Shiraz, where Sadi and Hafez came from there. So he wrote 100 books in many subjects, but probably the most important of all his work is the Canon of Medicine. Canon of Medicine, which is still in print. You can buy it in English and Arabic and other languages, and it was used as a main medical text in Europe for 600 years, in the medieval area and the dark times of knowledge in Europe. And he was very much in favor of writing and working in medicine based on his experience, not just the theory. And I believe he learned that from Razi. Razi was 160, 70 years before Avicenna, which I'll show you later on. Razi was a very practical doctor. As you will see, he was the world's first pediatrician in the world. And a lot of pediatricians in this town are telling me the same thing that I know. Avicenna also used work of Farabi, which I am in the middle of preparing a chapter for Farabi, and which is another known Iranian scientist. And he basically used, he was a very top mathematician and astronomer. And the calendar we are all used to using now is called Islamic calendar. It's actually Jalali calendar, belongs to Khayyam. Okay? I will show you later on. But the quote that Avicenna did in those days, like the rest of Europe and other parts of the world, Persia consists of many kingdoms. For those of you who are Iranian, know several cities like Isfahan, Hamadan, Kermanshah, Shiraz, Mashhad, and so forth. Each of those cities were capital of a kingdom at that time. So Avicenna started migrating from Bukhara and made his way all the way to Isfahan, where he wrote the Canon of Medicine. And each time he would go and would get invitation from one kingdom to go to a different city. He basically quoted as saying, "I grew so big that no city could hold me, but my price went so high that every buyer sold me." So he finally basically reached up to the prime minister of one of those kingdoms. He was so wise in terms of not only science and poetry and others, he was also wise in politics and in management and administration. This is Avicenna's moon craters. You can, the reference is there already. Razi was born in the city of Ray, which is a suburb of Tehran of today. He is a convert from Judaism into Islam, and spent his younger age in Ray, and then at the age of maybe 25 or 30, he moved to Baghdad. And this is a map of the time that he was born and lived. Razi went to Baghdad to study at the so-called House of Wisdom during the Abbasid Khalifa in the so-called Islamic era. And he ran into another convert from Judaism by the name of Al-Tabari, who became his first mentor in Baghdad. Unfortunately, Al-Tabari passed away rather early and soon, after a few years after they met each other, and Razi benefited from his wisdom. And he's written several books, and he has built several, at the time, hospitals in both Ray and Baghdad, and he was summoned to go to Baghdad twice or three times during his life, each time for a major project. It is rumored that when he wanted to choose a site for the hospital in Baghdad, he asked them to bring some meat from a sacrificed lamb or goat or what have you, and hanged it over several locations in the city of Baghdad. After 3 weeks, he went and examined all of them, and the one which spoiled the least, he said, "Let's do it right here." They built a hospital in that area. He also worked for Ray's ruler, Mansur Ishaq, and that's why he dedicated, most of the scientists have dedicated their books in the name of their sponsors. In those days, there was no National Science Foundation, no funding agency, so they had to attach themselves to a kingdom to get support from them so that they can spend all their time, day and night, to their projects and their ideas. So that is the reason you could see that. And of course, as I mentioned, he is known as the first pediatrician in the history of medicine. He discovered alcohol and sulfuric acid, and his book are all based on experimental, actual medical treatment of patients. In 1970, World Health Organization paid a tribute to Razi, saying that his writings on smallpox and measles show originality and accuracy, and his essay on infectious disease was the first scientific treatise on the subject. And as you might expect, he's also there on the moon. And you can see him treating a small child in his bed. The next scientist is another versatile genius scholar called Abu Rayhan Biruni, and Biruni for short. And he has made tremendous contributions in physics, metaphysics, mathematics, geography, and history. And you can see his statue in Dushanbe, capital of Tajikistan. He was born in Kharazm, the greater Khorasan, Persia, now part of Uzbekistan. And then he passed away in 1048. He has done amazing work, and his life runs through 2 centuries, so I put here 2 different maps. He recognized the concept of eclipse in those days. This is a picture right out of one of his books, which shows sun and moon are several different states of moon shining on the earth. And this is a page of the book by Biruni, description of eclipse and position of the sun, various phases of the moon and earth in his book. It was unbelievable what he did 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, he used very elementary instrument and trigonometric formulation, which he and Khwarazmi had a big share in creating those trigonometric relationships to estimate the radius of the earth within 1% error. How did he do it? He went to a part of Khwarazm, perhaps on the coast of either Caspian Sea or Aral Sea, where there is a mountain close to the beach. And he pinpointed 2 known points on the beach with a distance d in between, and used an instrument called astrolabe to measure the angles of the mountain summit. As here, you would measure this angle theta 2 and measure of this angle theta 1. He also after these measurements, as you can see in geometry, if you have 2 angles of a triangle and 1 distance, that's enough to solve the rest of it. So what he did, he brought his people and his instrument, and they actually climbed the mountain. They climbed all the way to the summit of the mountain. And at the mountain, which is right here, he looks at the horizon and looks at the sun to be setting and measured another angle alpha. between D, which is now known to him because of the previous calculation, and this distance is also known as long as you have a same value r. He calculated the value of r, the radius of the planet Earth, using another trigonometric relationship. Those relationships are in the book. I intentionally didn't bring too many equations in my presentation. And I will soon, when I have the book, the written books prepared, I will have them reviewed by scientists that I know through my network, and then I'll put them on the internet. The other way, I guess. So here's the moon crater of Biruni, which is close to the one by American scientist Goddard, one of the NASA centers that I have dealt with in Maryland is Goddard Space Station. This particular Goddard Space Station have to do with earth sciences on part of NASA's mission. Khwarazmi. Khwarazmi is a legendary Persian scientist of both 8th and 9th centuries who created the field of algebra in mathematics and created the notion of recursive computing, namely algorithm. You know, in those days, Arabic language was a very popular language, sort of like English is today. And many people would rather write in Arabic to get the maximum audience to read their papers and books. So Khwarazmi is called Al-Khwarazmi, and then they coined algorithm based on his name. So he was born in Khwarazm, which now is called Khiva, in Greater Khorasan province, now in Uzbekistan. And he lived to be about 70 years, and he passed away in Baghdad and buried there. And indication is that as a youth he was a Zoroastrian and converted to Islam later on. And this is the map at that time, and you can see Khwarazm where he was born. And this is a page out of one of his books on algebra. His book is called Al-Kitab Al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab Al-Jabr. This was translated as compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing. Basically, he was able to solve what we now call algebraic problems using geometry. Okay. In the book, I have shown the diagram in geometry where a quadratic equation like that one is being solved. Okay. And to some extent, it's the same concept as Maryam Mirzakhani did. She also used geometry to solve very difficult problems that nobody else had done. I'll go over it later. But what was important that Khwarazmi already knew the concept of numbers from 1 to 9, but he was not aware of the number 0. He learned that someone in the Hindu mathematician who unfortunately had passed away, the Hindu mathematician in India had put a dot into this number system. And he sent his friends and his workers to India and looked for the library to find that book. And they finally did it after 2-3 years. They brought the book back to Khwarazm, and he started creating the concept of 0 as another number, which has no value. Okay. Then he really completed the whole picture between 1 to 0. And that allowed him to go to the negative numbers before 0. Before that, he couldn't even know there is a negative number makes any sense. Okay. So again, you can see his creators and his contributions, of course, are immense. Khwarazmi is one of the most consequential scientists mathematician and astronomer today in 21st century. He credited with the following lasting contribution. He was the first one to branch mathematics out to different branches, father of algebra. He created the notion of algorithm, repetitive computing. Some consider him as the forefather of computer science as a field. He used Hindu's work on a dot later and called it zero number and developed the 0 to 9 decimal counting system, impacting arithmetic all the way to our current century. He also worked on the world map and calendar, and he made lasting impacts on trigonometry, astronomy, geography, calendar, etc. And of course, NASA honored him by putting a crater on his name. Khayyam is the last of the group of scientists I want to share with you tonight. Khayyam is amazing. He is a mathematician, an astronomer, astrologer, physician, and yes, a poet, also a poet. To some extent, it was unfortunate that Englishman, Edward Fitzgerald, in 31st of March, he lived in this era in the 19th century. He translated his book of poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And the world are only looking at his poetry, some of which, by the way, is not necessarily his own poets. His disciples added his own poets to his 200 ghazal and added another 400, so it's all under his name now. This is what I'm reading. So the world learned about him through his poetry, which is probably just a side occupation for him. What he did, he solved a third order equation, and of course he was born in Neshabur, which is currently, even right now, is a city in Iran, and he died, one of the oldest of all of them, at the age of 83, and that was the map at that time. And this is a crater under Khayyam's name. Now, in the 11th century, when he was asked by Seljuk Sultan Jalal al-Din Malik Shah of Persia, asked him to put a calendar together. The reason they wanted a calendar, they were having problem in finding when is the next time the people have to pay taxes. They didn't know because there is no New Year at that time. So everything was sort of hodgepodge as to when it is. They just looked at the seasons and they tried to make an approximation of when is winter, when is summer, when is things. So they needed to collect more taxes, and timely where they needed a calendar. So he produced a calendar which is called the Jalali calendar, which now they call the Islamic calendar because it was probably written in Arabic. And he headed a group of several scientists, and after 8 years, on March 15, 1079, a week before the Persian New Year, Nowruz, he computed length of the calendar year, 365 point. Once you know how long is the 1 year, then you know when is your next year and next year and next year. Okay? And this calculation up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 digits, after 10 centuries, this figure is still, 4 figures is still valid. Okay? So it's amazing that without the calculator, without any computer, no cloud, nothing, he was able to calculate it that accurately. It's really mind-boggling on what these people have done. Now let's go to the poets. You know, Rumi is probably the greatest Sufi poet of all time. his time was 13th century, and it's being honored immensely by our fellow brother country, Turkey, in Konya, Turkey, which Jill and I have been fortunate to visit and visit his shrine and his grave and so forth. At the age of 12, his father, Baharuddin Walid, who himself was a scientist of well-known, he decided to move from Balkh, where he was born, in today's Afghanistan and then greater Khorasan, to avoid the curse of the Mongol invasion. They start going toward western part of the time, and they moved toward what is today Turkey. After several years on the road, they went to many cities, including Mecca and Medina and Damascus. The family resided in Konya, close to the Anatolian Peninsula, now in Turkey. Anatolian Peninsula at the time belonged to Byzantine or the Eastern Roman Empire. So his life was, every day of his life was a divine to go and love the holy God and Lord. And I will show you his books. This is again the rundown on his birth and death and other issues. He did have a son called Sultan Veled, and again, this was the map at the time. And this is Balkh, right here. This is now, today is in Afghanistan. And he moved all the way, went to Mecca and Medina, somewhere here, and then went to today's Damascus, somewhere here, and then ended up somewhere here in Konya, just outside of the time with the Persian map. When his father passed away in Konya, a close friend of his father, who was also named Jalal, he went from Balkh to Konya to be of some help to Maulana. And this friend of his father was his first mentor in Balkh. And he found it as his own responsibility to go there and not only be helping him, but also mentoring him and try to reduce the burden of loss of his father. He stayed there for a while, and after a while, he told Maulana, he said, I'm such a lion myself, like you and I both are a lion in our own rights, and we are not both needed here, and that's why I want to go back to Balkh. However, he said furthermore, a great friend will come to you, and you will be each other's mirror. That great friend was Shams of Tabriz, a wandering dervish. And ironically, he was himself, Shams, was wandering from Khorasan all the way to Konya. And basically, that was the beginning of his Sufism and beginning of his poetry, talents of poetry that people didn't know he had. So, in fact, In fact, it was after meeting Shams that Maulana became a superb poet, spontaneously composing ghazals, being collected in a book called Diwan-e-Kabir or Diwan-e-Shams. And the rumor is that he was reciting it without writing. One of his students was writing very quickly. And then he would go and review it himself, then he would be ready to go. Rumi saw Shams as himself. His association with Shams took 10 years. Rumi's students were annoyed by losing time to learn from their great mentor. So Shams disappeared once, then Walid, Sultan Walid, Rumi's son, went to Damascus and found him and brought him back to Konya. The second disappearance was rumored that Rumi's students killed him. Rumi was already so involved with love of the Lord, accepted the loss of his own mirror. So nobody knows where Shams was killed, where was he buried. They just got rid of him because he was basically dominating all the time that Rumi had in that place that you will see later on in his school in Konya. His masterpiece, Matnavi, is ghazals that, as I mentioned, cited by Rumi, and Chelbi, one of his disciples, wrote them at the same time, and then later on he would do. The first غزال is بشنو از نی چون حکایت می کند از جدایی ها شکایت می کند. Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation. In Matnavi, over 800 years ago, Rumi addressed discoveries such as gravity, quantum physics, nuclear physics, nuclear explosion, dialectics, philosophy, astronomy, and many other scientific facts. For example, on sunlight, spinning galaxies, and forces of gravity. آسمان گوید زمین را مرحبا با تو ام چون آهن و آهنربا. The sky hails the earth. I am with you as the iron is with the magnet. In terms of sunlight, این چراغ شمس کو روشن بود، نه از فتیل و پنبه و روغن بود. سقف گردون کو چنین دایم بود، نه از طناب و استتی قایم بود. The burning light of the sun is not from burning oil and wick. Our spinning galaxy, which is so continuous, is not constructed on columns fastened by wires. So he recognized that nothing holding Earth together. Nothing is the magnetic gravity of different planets which are spinning around in galaxy. It's ironic that 450 years later, in 1687, Isaac Newton discovered the gravitational forces by observing an apple falling from a tree. And he basically predicted that 450 years earlier. Nuclear fusion. آفتابی در یکی ذره ناگهان آن ذره بگشاید دهان. ذره ذره گردد افلاک و زمین پیش آن خورشید چو جست از کمین. Inside each particle is a hidden sun. That's the atomic cell, atomic particle. Suddenly that particle opens its mouth, the galaxies and Earth become shattered in front of that sun when it comes out of hiding. And again on the issue of sun and the particle, nuclear particle, اینت خورشیدی نهان در ذره شیر نر در پوستین بره. There is a sun hidden in a particle. The male lion is in lamb's clothing. Very innocent particle of atomic particle. You open it and you see the hell will break loose. Rumi's, sorry about that location of the title. He was actually going in the bazaars and then start dancing around himself. And people thought he was going crazy. He was actually getting closer to the Lord, to God. And that dance is called Sama. It's a divine way of expressing himself. And this dance style practice called Sama survived over 800 years. Sama introduced a special divine. We are dancing and singing with symbolic attire. As you can see here, some more dancers here. And this is the mausoleum of Rumi. When Gilles and I were in Konya, a couple of my students from Turkey were our guide, and there was a roundabout in the city of Konya where these Sama dancers were actually made and were rotating. They had a symbol of what Rumi's Sama dancing and the way it works was there. Saadi is another well-known poet which was born and raised in my home city, Shiraz. This is his mausoleum. This is a couple of pages or cover of his two important books, the book called Bustan, the Orchard, and the Golestan, the Rose Garden. Again, this is the map at the time. This is Shiraz where he was born. And Saadi was, like Rumi, was afraid of the onslaught of Mongol coming from East Asia. So he traveled a lot. In one period, he traveled almost for 30 years. And he went to Egypt, to Syria, to Anatolia, Adana, and near Konya in today's Turkey, and Iraq, to Basra, and so forth. What I didn't know, and a lot of probably my fellow Shirazi or fellow Iranians didn't know, that Saadi became slave for 7 years of his life when he was on travel in Lebanon of today. During his 30 years of wandering, he was captured by crusaders of Acre in today's Lebanon, where he was a slave for 7 years with hard labor. Imagine if we had another additional 7 years from this genius, what else he could have done in terms of poetry and other additional pieces of work. And then, of course, he was later released by Mamluks, slave army of the Abbasid Khalifa, paid ransom for his release, and then he finally went back to Shiraz. Before that, he went to Jerusalem and Mecca and Medina. He has written a part of a poem which a lot of people, including Martin Luther King, have learned from these words of Saadi. He says, بنی آدم از یک پیکرند که در آفرینش ز یک گوهرند چه عضوی به درد آورد روزگار دیگر عضوها را نماند قرار تو که از مهنت دیگران بیغمی نشاید که نامد نهند آدمی. Translation: The sons of Adam are limbs of each other, having been created of one essence. When the calamity of time affects one limb, the other limbs cannot remain at rest. If you have no sympathy for the troubles of others, you are unworthy to be called the name of a human. This is the whole objective of United Nations. And no wonder it's written on the walls of the United Nations. And each time that I know our former president, Obama, at the New Year's Nowruz time greetings, he would refer to Saadi's poems. Currently, in current times, I have Professor Mahmoud Hesabi, who is of the 20th century Persia in Iran, rather, is a physicist who was educated in Switzerland and in Beirut, American University of Beirut, as well as France, University of Paris, and Sorbonne University. And he is rumored to actually have a visiting position for a short time in Princeton with Albert Einstein. This is one of my mentors, Professor Fazlullah Reza, whom I've known for 43 years. He is a pioneer in information theory, electric circuit an authority in Persian poetry, especially with the Persian epic poet Abul Qasim Ferdowsi, the one that I did not cover today, right now, hopefully next time. He was born on January 1st, 1950 in Rajt, and knock on the wood, now he's 120 years young. 3 years ago, I had an occasion to go to Montreal, Canada, to witness a PhD defense. And I bought a birthday cake, took one of my friends, Professor Agdam, and we drove to Ottawa, went directly to his house. The cake was too small, I couldn't put 100 candles on it. So what I did, I picked 3 candles, one of them tall, 2 of them small, become 100. And we celebrated his 100th birthday. And Queen Elizabeth sent him a congratulations, because his last job before he retired was ambassador of Iran in Canada. And that's why he lives still in Ottawa. I talk to him every 2-3 weeks, and he's still very, very sharp. His mind is very, very sharp, and he's written books even after 100 years old. Okay, I have to find out what does he eats for breakfast. Okay, he received his master's degree. First of all, he is the first electrical engineer in Iran. In 1934, he entered the University of Tehran College of Engineering, and then 1938 he graduated, and 1937 Lotfizadeh came to the same school, and they were friends even then together. And for one of the laboratory courses, Lotfi was actually a student of Reza. When we were honoring Lotfi in Santa Fe, Professor Reza said, make sure you bring that point up. I was his teacher. He received his master's degree in electrical engineering from Columbia in '46. He actually came to US a couple of years earlier than Lotfi, and then got his PhD from Polytechnic University of New York. He actually came to San Antonio 3-4 years ago. Some of the folks here, they remember him, that we put his poetry and presentation on YouTube. You can Google him on YouTube and see what he's done. We have a very superb Iranian brain surgeon who was educated in Germany, and he has his own private hospital, which made to look like a human brain, and he is in huge demand from all over the world. The kingdoms of Persian Gulf area, they send a private plane for him, bring him with all his devices and his surgical devices, go to the Gulf area and perform operation. He's really, really amazing. And anytime I talk to my German friends, they open their eyes and said, yeah, we are so proud that having Professor Sami in our country and in our town. Now, come toward the end of my presentation, I want to dedicate this talk to Maryam Mirzakhani. Maryam was born in 1977, and 40 years later passed away a few weeks ago in Stanford. You see these pictures for her Fields Medal of American Mathematical Society, AKA, or also known as Mathematics Nobel Prize. This is receiving it from President of Korea, lecturing in the class. That's her husband, who's a Czech, and his daughter. And the rest of the information is again here. And he was born, as I said, in 1977 in Tehran. Her father was an electrical engineer, and she attended a special high school for exceptional talents and exceptional people in Iran. And in 1994, she won the gold medal of the International Mathematical Olympiad in Hong Kong, and a year later, she won 2 gold medals because she had no mistake in the entire competition, 0 mistakes. Then she moved to United States after graduating in mathematics at Sharif University of Technology in 1999, and then went to United States and joined Harvard and worked with another field medalist, Professor Curtis McMullen. In the video that I saw the event in Stanford, Professor McMullen says that every week I would see Mariam, I learned something new. And he said that Mariam has done something that, like going to the summit of a mountain, that nobody before her was able to go to that mountain, all the way to the top. Because mathematics is a very old part of our scientific methods. But doing research is either impossible to do, or you have to live with unsolved problems. Okay. And what happened was this, that in the 19th century, 1826, 1866, ironically, another German mathematician, Bernhard Riemann, who also ironically lived to be 39 years old, 1 year shorter than Mariam. He proposed what's called theory of moduli spaces. In Liemann's work is to find the mechanism to find surface area and volume of every object you could have in real world. The sphere is very simple to do. Everybody knows that. But torus, looking like a donut or this kind of a space, is very, very difficult. And Mariam solved that problem in her PhD dissertation. Something that 150 years people were not able to do. And that's why in a matter of 10 years, 10 or 15 years, she got every possible award that people would be lucky to have 2 of them for their entire career, including not only field awards, Nobel Prize of Mathematics, but elected into American Philosophical Society, elected National Academy of Science, a small group of scientists are in there, an American Academy of Arts and Sciences, very exclusive club. Now, Professor Lotfizadeh, father of Fuzzy, that's my own title I gave him in 1992 when I was honoring him in Santa Fe. He was born on February 4, 1921 in Baku, Azerbaijan. His father was from Ardabil of today's Azerbaijan of Iran. So from his father's side, he was Azeri. His mother was a Russian pediatrician from Moscow. And they got married in Baku, and when he was born, he was there for 10 years. Then because of the fact that at that time, it was Soviet Union and communism revolution had taken place and was in full swing, they decided to go back to Iran, and then they would reside in Tehran. He was 10 years old at that time. Basically, it means in 1931, around that time. As I said, his real name is Lotfullah Asgharzadeh. When he became U.S. citizen years later, he changed it to Lotfizadeh, which is very simple. And he went to what now we call it Alborz High School. At that time, they call it Jordan American School, and he said that they made a mistake of putting him, the guy is 10 years old. They put him as a sophomore in high school. He jumped about 3-4 years, but he was so good he could manage it. So they put him into a higher grade than he should have been put. And he passed away, as I said, at the age of 96 on September 6th. And he was a professor of computer science at the University of California. And in 1965, he wrote an article in an obscure journal called Fuzzy Sets. What he did, he realized that humans have no role in hard sciences. The human reasoning is a very approximate process. Nobody looks at their watch, okay, this is the time to check out of the hotel. Nobody does that. It's always approximate. So he was able to put human reasoning into mathematical framework through fuzzy set, later on fuzzy logic, and different disciplines of attached with fuzzy. Now, because he was from science, from the community of engineering, electrical engineering, system and controls engineering, he was the target of criticism from everybody in English-speaking countries. And he used to say, I have no problem, you attack me anything you want, I'll take it as a compliment. Okay? And if he was debating things from people and they didn't like how to debate with him, he said, I agree with everything that you did not say. Okay? So he was very humorous also. 3 years ago, Gila and I went to visit him in Berkeley, and that's his 94th or 94th year picture. This is myself, this is Gila, this is Jale and Geren Etemad, our joint mutual friend. This is his wife. Faye, which is very beautiful. Lotfi is known to be very fond of ladies. Okay. Very often in conferences, if he was talking to a bunch of men, I was there next to a bunch of group circling him, then some ladies moved, and he moved away and walked with them. And one of the people next to me was chancellor of a university in Greece, and he wanted to give him an honorary doctorate degree. He walked away. He never got the honorary doctorate degree. But he did have a very beautiful lady. Let me tell you the story behind Faye. Faye is a native of Latvia, one of the Baltic states close to Finland and close to Poland, far west of Europe. Faye's father and mother, before they even know each other, were on a train going to Tokyo, Japan. And they met each other on the train. By the time they got to Tokyo, they fell in love and they got married. And Faye was born in Tokyo. Okay. These are written in a book that Gila and I published for them. It says The Life and Travels with the Father of Fuzzy Logic. This magic carpet, and you see them in costume, maybe Halloween costumes, it came about by a long weekend that we worked with Lotfi for 6 months so he could take time off for 3 days. We flew, Gila and I flew to Reno, and then we went to Lake Tahoe. Lotfi and our friends, the Etemad, came together. The 6 of us spent 3 days and 3 nights in one nice location on the Lake Tahoe. And it was Gila and I who told Faye, write your whole story in a book, My Life and Travels with the Father of Fuzzy Logic. And this was translated into Russian and Azeri in Baku. And in the book, she expresses all the wonderful and some not so wonderful events during her time with Lotfi. They were married for 71 years. And the book, put it in the form of electronic. And soon I'll put it on YouTube. People can download it free of charge. Okay? But with the sale of the book and the contribution of Faye and their son, Norman, and me, Angela, we created a scholarship fund in San Diego, which is now around $70,000 for Iranian American students all over the United States. It's called Jamshidi-Zadeh Scholarship. But Lotfi didn't put a penny into that project, to be honest. I would have said him if he was alive. I would say, and he said, "You're right, I didn't do it." But Faye did, and Norman did. He received at least 30 honorary doctorate degrees, fellow of many societies, including Russian Academy of Natural Sciences, member of National Academy of Engineering, Medal of Honor of the IEEE, highest IEEE medal, and over 3 years ago, I was honored to give a lecture at US Patent Office on system of system engineering. And I saw a poster there which shows sort of like a counter of how many patents are made on fuzzy logic. 3 years ago was over 22,000 patents. I suspect right now that number, I have to check, but it's around maybe 30,000 patents has been issued with that. Okay, the other way around. So let's wrap up the lecture by saying the impact of those 7 individuals. Bu Ali Sina, with his seminal masterpiece, The Quantum, was a key medical text in Latin for 600 years in Europe. Biruni estimated radius of the Earth plus or minus 1% 1,000 years ago. Khwarazmi created the field of algebra and the notion of algorithm, a cornerstone of the field of computer science and computer programming. Khayyam is credited with Jalali calendar known as the Islamic calendar and computed length of the year by this number of days. After 12 centuries or 10 centuries, I should say, first 4 digits are still valid. Razi created the world's first encyclopedia of medicine, Kitab al-Hawali al-Kabir, comprehensive book of medicine. He is also known as father of pediatrics. Maulana, a world-admired Sufi poet, with his celebrated masterpiece, Matnavi, in which predicted Earth gravity, nuclear explosion, among many other lifelong advices. Saadi, a recognized deep thinker and poet, whose verses helping fellow human is inscribed in the Hall of United Nations. And now I would like to show the video, a 10-minute video about the life of Maryam. This was the tail end of the event at Stanford. Okay, my last slide. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I hope that I live long enough to be able to realize this dream of putting all this information in one setting, in one location, and hopefully will be translated into Russian, Arabic, and Farsi. Thank you very much.